All right, so we're still speaking about the Beinoni, which is really the level that we should each strive to reach. It's a level in which we are not only aware that both the divine soul and the animal soul exist within us, but we also allow the godly soul, the divine soul, to triumph each and every time. And the triumph of the divine soul is not just in action, that we always do the right thing, but it's also in speech, we always say the right thing, and it's also in thought. We always think the right thing or the divine thing. And even when there's a bad or negative thought that permeates, we're able to push it out with two hands, as the Tanya said. That's the level of the Beinoni. Now, the very last idea that we studied last week was this idea here on page 6 that speaks about how God really helps us, because eventually he wants us to ensure the triumph of the divine soul. He wants to see the divine soul win. So God comes and helps us in this battle against the animal soul. And even when someone feels lonely, as we said, or even when we feel that the challenge is humongous, still we have to know that Anochi Omed, as Rabbi Nachman Breslev says, that God stands there with us and supports us. Spoke about Somech Noflim, if you recall that God supports the fallen in a verse in Ashrei and so on. So that was the big idea. And just the idea that God, again, is with us should reinvigorate us in this inner struggle between the animal soul and the godly soul. Okay, let's continue then where we left off, bottom of page 6. Yet inasmuch as the evil in the left part of the Beinoni. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
I'll read if nobody else wants. Okay. Yet inasmuch as the evil in the left part of the Benoni's heart, is in its innate strength, craving after all the pleasures of this world, not having been nullified in its minuteness in relation to the good, nor having been relegated from its position to any degree. Though the arbitrator's decision blocked the animal soul's intentions, its power is neither negated nor diminished. Evil in full array persists in the Benoni no less than in the Rasha. Evil may have no outlet for expression, but it is still there. In contrast, for the Tzaddik, evil ceased to exist in the presence of the overwhelming good.
Right. So it's an important idea, because as we just admit these two additional in our room, there you go. As we struggle with animal soul, and as we hopefully overcome it each and every time in those three realms of action, speech, and thought, we have to remember that the struggle is really a life struggle. It's an ongoing one. There's never a time in which we can say, okay, we've become triumphant. That the Beinoni at least can say, I don't know, maybe some of your tzaddikim, and the tzaddik can say that, but the Beinoni can't say that, okay, I've arrived. Just as we've mentioned this in the past, but Rabbi Steinsaltz would very often say that if you think you've arrived, you're lost. It's always ongoing. Now, it's important to remember that. And by the way, even King David says in a very strong way that in Psalm 51, there's a verse in which he says, V'chatati negdi tamid, that I have sinned in front of God always. Now, what does that mean? Is King David in a perpetual state of sin? What does that mean? And the Talmud explains, no, it's not that King David was in a perpetual state of sin. I don't think anyone on this planet is in a perpetual state of sin. When you sleep, I don't know if you sin. When can't be engaged in the perpetual. But what King David is really saying is that the potential of sin is constantly there. And just the reminder that there's a potential to sin should keep us on top of our game. It's when we become complacent, and it's true not just with sin, but by the way, it's true with anything else in life. It's when we become complacent, when we become maybe too haughty and arrogant to think that we've triumphed. That's when sin gets to us, or that's when negativity gets to us, and that's when challenge overcomes us. It's that constant reminder, as the Tanya says right here, as you just read, that the animal souls is neither, the power at least of the animal soul is neither negated nor diminished. even for it persists in the Beinoni all the time, no less than in the Rasha. It's there all the time. Now, I think that it's true again for every area of life, not just, mitzvah versus sin. I think it's true in general for, for business. I think it's true for our personal lives. I think it's true in education, that we have to recall and remind ourselves that that we can't rest on our laurels, that there's always room to grow, always room to overcome the animal soul that might be trying to seep in. I will say that this was put in a very harsh way, and I'm hesitating whether to share this or not, but the Kotzker Rebbe, who was known for being very harsh, he was a fiery person who spoke the truth and wasn't afraid to do so. And sometimes it really shocked people, but that's what he was good at. The shock treatment, they call it today. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, the Kotzker Rebbe. And he quoted the Talmud that says that a person should know that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the animal soul, constantly wants to conquer the person. And it's almost as if, this is the parable he gave, it's almost as if someone is lying under the guillotine, and the guillotine is about to fall on his head, and he has to be aware of that, of, chop off his head. So someone came up to him after the class and said, "But Rabbi, I don't feel that way. I'm trying to imagine myself under a guillotine as if it's about to chop off my head, and I just can't fathom that." And the Rebbe said to him, again, in a very harsh way, "So maybe that's a sign that your head has already been chopped off." In other words, that's it, you're doomed. But in many ways, the awareness that we are constantly living in this balance between good and bad, between being productive or being complacent, between making our lives meaningful or making our lives meaningless, is an awareness that the Beinoni lives with all the time. And therefore, he's able to allow his divine soul to triumph. If he didn't have the awareness, then again, the guillotine would fall on him. Then complacency will win. And then that deteriorates from that standpoint, from that point on. So it's an important awareness to constantly have in mind, especially as we struggle again with the animal soul and the divine soul. It's not coming to, God forbid, fill us with fear and insecurity. The opposite. It's coming to empower us so that we're always on top of our game, that we can always be ensuring that the divine soul wins over the animal soul. Even in English, I've always, there's many expressions like that in English that either reflect a deep truth or reflect a deep lie, and they shouldn't even exist. Even subtle expressions. I should write a book about that one, but there's so many things that we say that are just are meaningless. Even like oxymorons, just to give an example. I'm sure you've all heard of the expression, a moment of truth. Isn't that an oxymoron? Isn't truth eternal? And if truth is eternal, how could it live just in a moment? Or things like that, but doesn't matter. I'm not going there. The expression I was thinking of is, I wasn't myself today, right? I wasn't myself today, yesterday, or just this past moment. What does it mean I wasn't myself? But I think that reflects the deep truth. What does it mean? How do you not become yourself? You don't become yourself because you fall in this complacency. And then you lose who you are. You lose the game. Imagine a boxer in a ring who stops boxing for a second. He forgets that he's in the game. That's when the opponent can get the better of him. So I wasn't myself. I just lost myself. And in many ways, this is what the Tanya is saying here. Be yourself all the time. Your truest self, your divine self. How do you do that? It starts with this awareness that you constantly have to have the divine soul overcome the animal soul, because the animal soul is not going anywhere. So that's the idea. Again, I don't want this to be just a monologue, so feel free to speak your mind, but otherwise we can carry on, but I welcome also, it's important to say, not just comments, but disagreements too.
Philosophers would say life is not finding yourself, it's creating yourself.
Oh, very good. Good, which means, let's go deeper into that for a second, which means?
Which means, you know, we always are looking for answers, but the answers are always internal, not necessarily external.
Right. Right, and it's showing up with like creating the best version of yourself each and every moment, which is in sync with what we're saying, right? That creating ourselves also means that a person who's creative, who's in the flow of creation, he has to be present. He has to be aware. In many ways, he has to be cognizant that there's an animal soul that might be trying to interrupt his creativity. And therefore, he has to have this awareness that we're speaking of. I think this pertains, if I may, just to touch upon your point, William, also, but there's a great Hasidic Rebbe, about Asher Foyer was his name. But he would give this beautiful parable. I'm sure you've all heard another expression. Let's just go there for a second. I'm sure you've all heard of that expression that says that I have a stone on my heart, Even alibi in Hebrew. So I'm carrying something that's heavy on me. Stone on my heart. At least that's the expression in Hebrew. I don't know if it goes in English too. But something's heavy on my heart. And he would tell the story of this person who had a stone on his heart, and everywhere he went, he tried to throw away the stone. He faced the river, and he tried to throw away the stone, and the stone was glued to him, and he couldn't. Then he went on top of a mountain, and he tried to throw it away from the top of the mountain. Still didn't work. Wherever he went, he tried to take that stone that was heavy on him, and we all have things that are heavy on our hearts, and that person tried to throw it away, but it didn't work. Until he met this old wise man in the street. And this old wise man tells him, "What's wrong with you? I see you very anxious." He says, "Look, I have a stone in my heart, and I've been trying to get rid of it, and I haven't been successful." And the wise man says, "Why are you getting rid of it? Lift it, carry it, elevate it." And in many ways, what this Hasidic Rebbe was saying is something very powerful, that God doesn't just give us stones to get rid of. These stones are there for us to elevate them, or for them to elevate us. So instead of trying to get rid of them, maybe we should develop a new relationship with them, where we can ask, what are they? Why are they there? What are they teaching us? And what can we bring the challenge? What can we teach that challenge, that stone? And maybe that's the deeper meaning behind that prophecy in Ezekiel that says, "Vasiroti et lev ha'even mikirbechem v'natati lachem lev basar," that I have removed the hearts of stone from within you, and I have given you hearts of flesh. When we deal with the stones that we have, the stones become hearts. They empower us, they elevate us. In many ways, that comes again with that awareness that, fine, they are stones, but it's our duty to show up every single moment and transform those stones into hearts so that they elevate us, or we elevate them. But we don't get rid of them. And the divine soul knows that that's its purpose. Animal soul thinks it's a stone. The divine soul knows that these challenges weren't given to us to get rid of them, but quite the opposite, again, to turn them into hearts that empower. So that, again, comes with this awareness too. Maybe that's the creation too of the heart, from stone to heart. Okay, let's continue. Again, unless there's anyone else who wants to speak their minds, please feel free to do so. Okay. Except insofar. Bottom of the page, your very last paragraph, page 6.
Except insofar as it has no authority and power to diffuse itself throughout the limbs of the body, because the Holy One, blessed be He, stands at the right hand of the poor man, helping him and irradiating his divine soul.
Right. Let's turn the page and read that paragraph. Rabbi Stein's commentary, page 8. No, sorry, page 7.
Yeah. Evil is not limited by good's restraining power, rather by the assistance that the good receives from above. The author returns here to an additional difficulty raised in the first chapter. Such a person is likened to a wicked man. In the words of our sages, even if the whole world tells you that you are righteous, in your own eyes, regard yourself as if you were wicked, not as actually wicked.
Right. And by the way, that's how the Tanya opened up. In the first chapter, if you recall, now we're in chapter 13, but in the first chapter, the Tanya brings this contradiction because on the one hand, the sages teach us this teaching, that even if the whole world tells you that you are righteous, in your eyes, you should always regard yourself as wicked. But on the other hand, the Tanya says, if you regard yourself as wicked, you'll come you'll sink yourself in pessimism. You'll start becoming depressed. And that's also against the Torah because you have to be happy. It's a divine commandment to be happy. If you do it, Hashem b'simcha, worship God with happiness. So there's a dichotomy here. On the one hand, you have to see yourself as wicked. On the other hand, seeing yourself as wicked will lead you to depression. So what are you supposed to do? And the answer is in exactly what the Tanya is expressing. No, it's not like you're saying to yourself, I'm wicked, I'm wicked. You're not looking at yourself in the mirror and you're saying to yourself, oh, I'm a terrible person. No, what you're saying is that there's a potential of wickedness knocking at your door. And as long as you allow the divine soul to conquer yourself, that potential will never enter those doors. So you know that the potential is there, and therefore you can never rest on your laurels. But on the other hand, you also are still very happy because you're successful in allowing it to stay outside, to not enter. So that's where this dichotomy starts to make sense. It's really, the answer is in the balance that we can find between the two. That answers, again, now in chapter 13, he answers a question from chapter 1. Took some time, but still makes sense. It was a buildup. So that's the idea here. I just want to focus here on something that is very subtle in Rabbi Stein's words, but it's still very important to note. Evil is not limited by good's restraining power, rather by the assistance that the good receives from above. And what this is saying is that really evil doesn't stand a chance against good. Because good is divine. It receives assistance from a good received above. Good is divine. Divine is infinite. Bad is finite. And at any given point, the infinite always overpowers the finite. It's true with light and darkness. We see that even scientifically. Light overpowers darkness each and every time, no matter how thick the darkness may be. And we have to remember that. That in and of itself should give us the strength to not allow this animal soul to enter the door, as we were saying. Knowing that really the force of good, if we are able to unleash it, will overpower evil each and every time to the point that it will overwhelm it. Because it's divine, because we're attaching ourselves to infinity. There's a powerful story, maybe that makes this point, but about the Blazhover Rebbe, who was a Holocaust survivor. He was a big Hasidic Rebbe. By the way, he's buried not too far away from Rabbi Steinsaltz in Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. But the story he told once was that one day the Nazis decided to dig massive graves, big pits. And then they played a game with the Jews in the concentration camp, including the Blazhover Rebbe. And they said, anyone who's strong enough to jump over the pits that we just dug from one end of the pit to the other will survive. They continue on with the day. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You might be killed tomorrow, but today you'll survive. Those who are not strong enough will fall in the pits. That pit will become their grave. And the Blazhev Rebbe wasn't healthy, and he certainly wasn't young, but he had to jump over the pit, as everyone did. And there was someone who said to the Rebbe, someone who the Rebbe did not know, didn't look too observant, I would say. He wasn't part of the Hasidic group that the Rebbe had with him in the concentration camp, just someone that he didn't know. This asked the Rebbe, can I hold your hand as we jump over the spit so that we can jump together? The Rebbe said, of course. They held hands. When they got to the pit, they jumped over it, and miraculously, they were able to jump completely over and get to the other end. And this Jew who didn't know the Rebbe says to the Rebbe, wow, miracle happened. How did it happen? How were you, Rebbe, so old and so weak? How were you able to jump from one end of the pit to the other? And the Rebbe responded, look, I was holding onto the hands of my ancestors in heaven. And they were holding onto the hands of God on the throne of glory. And that's what helped me leap over. And the Jew says, now I understand, I was able to jump over the pit too, because I was holding onto your hand that was holding onto the hands that was holding onto God's hand. And in many ways, I think that that image is what the Tanya is saying, that we're not doing this alone. Yes, we have to have the awareness that animal soul is knocking at the door. But we're holding onto the hands of our ancestors, of God himself. And that image in of itself allows us to overcome the pits of life and jump over them.